Hello, everyone. Data observability is one of the key technologies for 2022. However, this space is not well defined. In this podcast, we will demystify the market, some products, and trends. You will be surprised to learn how many use cases data observability solves and why it is key to your data transformation success. My name is Sanjeev Mohan. This is another episode of It Depends. Everyone agrees that our data and analytics ecosystem is already complex and getting even more so. We are gathering more data from more sources at near real-time speeds, while data consumers and use cases keep increasing. As data has become so critical to our decision making, we can't afford to take it for granted. We need to have the transparency into the quality of data, its reliability, performance, and the cost of that data and the pipelines, especially before the business executive finds out that that report we generated last night is incorrect, or the CFO calls us and says, oh, by the way, your cost is too high. In today's data intensive pipelines, the stakes are high and the margin for error is razor thin. This is where data observability comes into the picture. Today, we have a very exciting guest with us. It's my pleasure to welcome Rohit Chaudhary, the CEO of Acceldata. Rohit, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, Sandeep. Thank you so much for having me on It Depends. A pleasure to be here. So my name is Rohit, and I'm the founder and CEO of Acceldata. Acceldata is one of the world's first data observability platforms, which provides, end-to-end comprehensive monitoring across the stack. And we'll talk a lot more about that. The company is about 3.5 years old, and I've been the founder CEO for as long as I can, think about running this company. My previous background is from data processing. I used to be at Hortonworks, where I was a senior director of engineering for multiple initiatives, including Apache Ambari, Apache Zeppelin, and several others.
That is great. Thank you. Welcome to the show, Rohit. Let's get started. So, listeners, we have divided this show into 3 different segments. So we'll talk about data observability from the market point of view. Then we'll talk about Acceldata from the product point of view. And then I have a few leadership questions in the end. Hopefully, we'll get to those before our time is over. So let's go with the first question. So, Rohit, we've been hearing so much about data observability. Actually, the entire observability space has been hot for many years. Companies like Splunk, Datadog, New Relic have been around for a long time. What is the difference between these companies and what they do and data observability?
It's a very interesting question, Sanjeev. And I think, this is the anchoring conversation or the anchoring question for the rest of our, discussion for the next 40 minutes or so. I think it's really important to understand that, the companies that you just referred to, whether it's New Relic, Datadog, Dynatrace, or any of those companies, they were actually built on the premise that there's large scale or wide scale automation of manually completed process, which then got transformed into IT applications. So people were deploying things like SAP, they were deploying Oracle, they were building custom applications to suit their business workflows, and they were putting that into production. When you needed predictability in the operations of those systems, which were converting manual processes into IT-led systemic processes, you needed monitoring, which allowed them to make sure that those systems were reliable. But those were primarily IT applications. Now, what has really changed in the world is that now everything has become extremely data intensive. You're trying to do, recommendation. You're trying to bring in next best action. You're trying to find out in real time what is the state of the union, the state of the business. And that is a very, very data intensive world. And I think in that world, the previous generation of monitoring, which is APM products or any of their likes, which predict or tell you the state of the union from a service point of view, from a server point of view, or tracing the request of a user generated action all the way to the backend systems is not enough. What you end up finding is that, when you're trying to get the insights out of data, those insights are very difficult to get. And the tools that you have at your hand at this point in time are less than 10 years old. They're not as mature as, let's say, an Oracle database. And therefore, you end up encountering failures, which are quite frequent. And since your day-to-day operational activities depend upon the kind of insights that you're generating out of data, you need observability, which is very, very specific to monitoring those use cases. Now, please note, in this case, when you're talking about data intensive applications and operations, you actually don't have a user generated action in most of the cases. What you're trying to do is that you're collecting data from several different sources. You're putting that together, harmonizing all of those different data signals into something that makes sense coherently. And upon that, you send all of that data for different consumption use cases, which could include machine learning and AI, standard analytics, custom dashboarding, BI and reporting, and many other use cases. But the number of use cases that you've started to deal with and the different varieties of data that you have to harmonize together to bring out the meaning out of it, it's almost impossible to monitor that with the previous generation APM tools. So famously, just like Jeff Bezos said, in one of his shareholder reports, that the era of a single database is done. It's the era of use case specific purpose-built databases. I would just fine tune that a little bit and say that the era of generic observability is over. The era of use case specific purpose-built observability tools right now, and data observability is just one of those.
I see. So why this interest now? I mean, we've been building data intensive applications for so many years. So what were the customers doing before this new category started coming in place?
Yeah, so I think we need to understand the backdrop of what has happened. So in the last 10 years, if you just look at the way data itself has changed, I think with the advent of web scale applications where you could have anywhere between 50 and 250 to 300 million users to 500 in many cases billions of users. The kind of pressures that are being put on the systems that collect, store, process, and then put the data for consumption for many of the use cases that are very popularly now known, I don't think the previous generation of applications had that ability or that need to deal with unstructured data in the way, shape, and form that it exists today. And I think that is the biggest difference. So if you look at the observability solutions for the previous generation technology, you always had a structure in which data could be stored. So you only got 5 of round ones and 4 of square ones. But these days you can get any combination, and you get new shapes which you don't even understand. And I think that is what is putting a lot of pressure. Along with that, the consumer-centric expectations.
So when the size is small, you can get by, but once you start just expanding the scale, then that's when these problems need to be addressed.
Absolutely. I mean, the volume and the velocity. I mean, if you just look at what's happening, the number of clicks that a user can generate or the number of insight points that can be generated while you're watching a Game of Thrones episode, which then can be captured by a technology company like Conviva and can be then shared back with HBO for them to determine where the ad should be placed. There are like so many points that you can collect in this whole journey.
Yeah.
So if you start thinking about these use cases, and how intense these are and how rapid and how fast they're coming, you'll find out that it requires observability because everything has now turned into being mission critical. I give this example to everyone that if Netflix stops using its recommendation engine for the next 2 hours, then I don't think they'll be able to drive traffic to the titles that they promised that they will drive traffic to. If Uber, the streaming system went down, the riders and the drivers won't be able to, see each other at the location that they promised to see each other. So I think there are some very fundamental things that are getting broken at this point in time. And if you don't start observing it, then, pain's the game then.
Right. So Rohit, since you're talking about this market space, so in the market space, we are just now coming to grips with the whole data governance. But before we can even figure out metadata management and data catalog, data ops shows up. And now we've got data observability. What do you see as an overlap between these 3 different spaces?
Yeah, so this is, I think, the fundamental problem that people are facing today. So let me describe this space a little bit from an ownership point of view. I think we'll have to demarcate the boundaries. If you spoke to the way that we learn about chief data and analytics officers, I think there have been different generations of them. And at this point in time, I think it is safe to say that the 3rd generation chief data and analytics officers, they're being the most successful in what they're trying to do right now. And these wave 3 or generation 3 CDOs, they essentially own three things. They own the team, which is supposed to, build all these complex data engineering workloads, pipelines, everything else. They also own the choice of the technology, which is that, they're determining whether they're going to go onto the cloud, they're going to be on-premise, they'll be hybrid, they have a multi-cloud hybrid setup. And finally, they're also responsible for delivering data. And when you put all of these three functions together, it actually tells you that that particular data org is expected to drive, innovation, revenue, and everything else associated with it in a certain way, at a certain cadence, at a certain clip, in a certain reliable fashion. If you looked at, what the wave one CDOs were doing, they were actually trying to implement MDM and data governance. But, one of the fundamental shifts that have happened in that market is that governance is no longer a one-time initiative.
Correct.
MDM is no longer a one-time initiative because, overnight you could be collecting more data. The unstructured data itself could have, added a few more fields. Application teams are collecting more data. They're writing more data into the central stores, on object stores, on HDFS, and God knows numerous other sources. If you think about all of that, what you find out is that, the traditional way of MDM, the traditional way of doing data governance is not going to be sufficient. Most of our, exec sponsors or, customers who I've spoken to, they're actually dealing with the multi-cloud hybrid setup. They have Oracle, Salesforce, Pivotal Cloud Foundry, Azure, AWS, Google in equal quantities. Now, if you're, sort of thinking that you can sort of manage this data, I think it's going to be a very, very difficult challenge. And so what you need is to basically shift all of this into an active method of governance, of management, so that you can bring all of this under control. That is what data observability ends up giving you.
I see. And data ops, what's the overlap with data ops?
Yeah, so data ops is at this point in time still a very loosely defined term, which sometimes vendors are using it to sort of indicate ingestion capabilities and prowess. And in some cases, data ops is actually materially a little more sort of consummate in its scope, in the sense that it is actually not consummate, but it's a wide scope. And in that wide scope, parts of monitoring also come into play. Now, in our fundamental view of the world, we believe that just the observability part is big enough and large enough problem for people to solve. Of course, data ingestion, transformation, movement, and making it ready for consumption is going to be and is a very, very valuable area. But we believe that observability will probably stand on its own as opposed to being a part of data ops.
Rohit, what are the main use cases that you see for data observability?
So I would say that 2 or 3 use cases fundamentally, and these are essentially, I think it's really important for us to understand what are people trying to do with their data systems, but all of that thematically tries or drives into something called reliability. I think it's important for people to be able to access high quality data. It's important for people to have their business processes, which are represented by abstractions, which are called data pipelines, those to run accurately, efficiently, and the number of times that they design it to work. And finally, the compute, the system or systems that are responsible for moving the data, transforming the data, making it available for consumptions, they are actually working in unison. They're not broken at the interfaces, and they're interoperating in the harmonious way that they were designed to. Now, oftentimes you'll find out that all of these are big challenges, and the adjacencies across these three, like I mentioned earlier, the chief data and analytics officer today is actually worried about all of these three together because he owns the team, he owns the quality of the data, and the choice of technology. And so when you put all of that together, you need a glue that allows these different teams with relatively different focus areas to still be able to speak with each other in a common lingo or vocabulary. And I think that is what we are trying to do.
So, we hear all the time, all these companies are in a rush to get into the cloud and they're very excited. They get into the cloud and then they get the first bill and then the second bill. And then the CFO is calling them saying, what's going on? Do you see data observability as playing a role in cloud migrations and cost optimization?
I think so. FinOps is going to be a very, very big area for customers, for 99% of the enterprises, because what you'll end up finding is that the initial enthusiasm of migration to the cloud will very, very quickly turn into nightmares for some, because while you have unlimited ability to go and bring up infrastructure that allows you to deal with the sort of workloads that you have in your org, if you do not put guardrails around those, that instant elastic availability of more resources, I think very, very quickly turns into nightmare.
I
So I
see.
think we will see that FinOps will become or play a very, very big role.
So, Rohit, I want to change track and talk about Acceldata as a product. But before I go there, let's talk about products. Why are there so many? Like all of a sudden, these are VC funded. I think there are about a dozen companies that at least I'm aware of.
Well, I'm so glad that there are a dozen companies, getting funded by VCs, because, we're not spending all our marketing dollars, and looks like, the space is legitimate. We've been saying that for about 3.5 years now. We started in 2018, and we had seen that this market is going to expand. I think as it happens in any category creation, there are a bunch of companies which actually come out of the gates, with equal velocity, some with more, some with less. And with tenacity and hard work and enterprise capability, with customer adoption, justification of revenue, the space gets formalized. So I think there will be a lot of companies that'll get created. I think what's also happening is that many of our cohort companies, they're also finding that certain use cases are easy to achieve and deliver. One of them being data quality, because it appears that there's like an opportunity to improve data quality solutions from the previous generation. Of course, it needs to be seen or being taken into context that there's a lot of context in the previous generation of tools as well. So I think that's another interesting area or reason why so many companies are coming together. But like I mentioned, any space has a lot of opportunities. I think everybody sees this as a massive opportunities, which is why entrepreneurs are taking this rough and arduous journey of going and building a category and a company.
So this is great to hear. Thank you so much. So all of you who are listening, don't be alarmed. There are so many companies. Celebrate it. It's birth of a new category. It's inevitable, and the world is big enough for all like various different companies to have a reasonable, good footing.
Yeah,
So,
one of our board members, George, actually puts this really well. He says that App Dynamics, New Relic, Dynatrace, all of these companies have legitimately built massive businesses by just going after different segments with different capabilities, with different GTM approaches. So I don't think all companies will exist, when we have the same conversation in 3 years' time or 4 years' time, but I'm sure that a lot of companies will exist.
That is great. So I hope to get you back in 3 to 4 years' time.
Of course.
All right. So let's talk about Acceldata. What was your motivation to start Acceldata?
Yeah, very interesting, right? I mean, I've been doing, my first 24/7 job, which was essentially monitoring systems in production, started at InMobi in 2009, when we were, the first mobile ad network. We hit tremendous scale. We raised $200 million in, way back when, 2011.
Oh,
And so
wow.
we had scale. And so by then, I was well versed with 24/7 site reliability engineering, understood what were the things that could break the system, could bring the whole business to a collapse and all of that. So my interest in debugging applications has been for a long time. I love production code debugging myself. I don't get too many opportunities to do that anyway. But fast forward that to 2015. I end up at Hortonworks, and I'm brought into this project called Ambari. Ambari is an amazing product, deployed at 2,500 organizations at that point in time, running over 10,000 production, UAT, non-production, dev, QE clusters. Great, right? Every night, the calls that I would get onto customer escalations would have only one theme, that, we have the platform, everything's installed, but we don't know what is going wrong, and just help us. And every time that I went and assisted my colleagues in support and everywhere else, we found out that, customers are just unable to deal with the complexity of tech. And that tech, which is generating or coming out of open source world, is not necessarily the most manageable yet. The manageability tools were not so well developed way back in 2016, 2017. In 2017, we started seeing a pattern by which, to which I think a lot of us have alluded to in the past, that, now there's an explosion. Earlier, there was just one Hortonworks and Cloudera, but, just look at what happened in the world in between. You had Confluent, Databricks, Snowflake, more is coming, and the advent of CSP services. Now, when you look at the customer environment, it's basically a scatter shop of all different kinds of technologies. And we saw that world coming in 2017, 2018. So in 2018, we decided that, look, if customers have to get widely successful, one of the biggest components that missing in the way, or something that they need in order to succeed, is visibility, because they actually lack the navigation map that they required from where they were in their enterprise maturity and capability from a data standpoint to all the way to what they would term as success. And unless you have that navigation map, it's very difficult to chart course. So we've essentially felt that there's basically a lack of visibility, and we, reviewed all the previous generation tools, and it was very, very clear that the previous generation tools were not sufficient. And if they were not sufficient, then what were the communities doing? And what we found out was that, even if the community went and solved, or an OEM went and solved a specific stack problem, the customer still has a multi-cloud hybrid problem. They're actually supposed to look at all of these systems in unison, and that single pane of glass did not exist. So that became the motivation for us. And for the last 3.5 years, we've just been building towards that objective.
So that is great. So 3.5 years. I think you're one of the earlier companies that got into the space. What are the major building blocks of Acceldata, and what makes it unique?
Yeah, so one of the fundamentally different approaches that we took was that we decided to become comprehensive right at the start. What we felt was that we wrote this internal paper way back in 2019, and that has so far stood the test of time. We essentially said that, look, these three teams that we're talking about, whether it's business practitioners and data engineers and site reliability engineering, they have to actually look at the world in a combined way, or in the same way. They have to look at the world with the same lens. And that lens needs to sort of, acknowledge the problems of each of the other groups. For example, if my data is not reliable, it's not because, somebody didn't want the data to be reliable. It is not reliable because, probably one of the underlying systems did not work at the SLA that it was supposed to. Probably one of the pipelines changed logic. Probably schema was different when the ETL process was written, whereas, the world has changed. Or the quality of data itself has started to depreciate. It's not the same that it was 2 days back, because the quality of feeds that we started getting from third-party sources, that changed. So the things that we did was essentially monitor the underlying compute so that there's like systemic reliability. We ensured that we have enough visibility into the data layer, and we have enough visibility finally at the data pipeline. So data which is getting generated at the point of origin to all the way to the point of consumption, you have end-to-end visibility into those data pipelines, into what is flowing through those pipelines. And you also have the view for the underlying systems that actually move the data along.
I see. So that's interesting. So you took a comprehensive view. So you're looking at what the business needs, data practitioners, like data engineers. So now that you have the product, who or what personas get involved in the process of buying, deploying, or using it?
Yeah, so data engineering continues to be, the driver for the acquisition of such technology, because data engineering teams, come to think of it, they need to go to bed as well. They can't be doing this 24/7 for years on end. Of course, the initial enthusiasm is great, and everybody punches through, gets the system into production, but operating that system and generating ROI is the hardest part. So when you think about mean time to resolution, when you think about root causing the same set of issues over a period of time, you actually start thinking that this is mundane. The best data engineers don't have to be operationally involved. And so when teams start thinking about taking it to production, scaling it, and eventually optimizing it for business needs, that's when that's the part that they need observability for. They want to automate things that they could have done through automation, and instead of spending time manually on that. I think what we also are seeing recently, and this is a more recent phenomenon in the last year or so, is that business teams are getting involved in sort of helping or co-sponsoring the acquisition of these technologies, because their neck is on the line as well.
Right.
So they're saying that, look, because you are unable to deliver data at the high quality and reliability, or systemic issues that you've come across all the time, it's probably better that even I sponsor your acquisition of this tech.
Yeah. That is very interesting that business users are getting involved because my heart goes out for the data engineering space because it seems like data engineering space is sort of caught between the data producers and data consumers. It's very frequently I talk to business users and they tell me, yeah, we decided that Marketo is a great tool for us or HubSpot. And then they sort of magically expect that the data engineering team will be able to integrate it into the ecosystem. So the data engineering team rises to the occasion, integrates it, and then the schema changes on the producer and it breaks everything on the consumer. And the data engineer is now back in the fray trying to get these to talk to each other. So I see why observability can be such a game changer for them.
It is exciting, isn't it? To become the hero every single day and, come
Till
to
you
the
burn
rescue.
out.
It's a lot of fun, but, only for a limited period of time.
Correct.
Nobody has, if you really are serious about, operating technologies at scale and making sure that, the systems are independently scaling without you pushing for it, then
Mhm.
I think, you need a lot more automation. You need more eyes in the system,
Yeah.
especially in the world. And, you're not going to stop adopting new technology anytime soon. For the next 10 years, I think, customers and enterprises, and we too as a company will have to be prepared for different kinds of integrations. There are more technologies coming on the back of these extremely successful data warehousing, data lake house,
Yeah.
big data companies.
So, Rohit, talking about this makes me wonder. We live in this very dynamic, fluid world, which is imperfect and complex. For your product, when in 2019, you said you wrote this paper, what did you envisage as your ideal customer profile?
Yeah, so we essentially wrote a few things, which is very, very interestingly, and that too again has stood the test of time. We said 50 terabytes of data or
I
more
see.
than 2 or 3 complex systems, which is streaming, ingestion, storage, querying, and you should be one of those global 2,500 companies. So that's become the mantra for us to actually go look for complexity in these areas. And so we're very, very clearly going after enterprise scale companies
I see.
which have traditionally dealt with large scale, large volumes of data, and they're in the business of serving a very, very huge contingent of users.
So, can you give an example of a case study? Just to.
Sure. I'll give you a couple of case studies for that matter. We work with a Walmart company called PhonePe. It has close to about 250 million daily active users, and last year alone they transacted about $500 billion. In fact, $645 billion on their platform in peer-to-peer and immediate cash transactions. So it's the Venmo and the PayPal equivalent in India. They have gone from I think. zero point 0.6 petabytes of data in 2019 January to approximately 40 plus petabytes this
Oh,
year. So that's been the scale of growth. It's 80x. And when you think about, what are the key issues that they could have faced as a business, I think, reliability is the number one concern. And reliability at the infrastructure level, which allows them to, compute or allow these massive, query engine kind of workloads, SQL, machine learning, custom dashboarding, BI, all of that from an OLAP perspective, but also they needed stability and reliability in their OLTP systems. So they needed, the PhonePe application opens up on the phone, and every time that it opens up, it's actually going and hitting a very, very fast, OLTP store. And so for them, the reliability of both of those were super critical and essential. They were also, sort of tied up in a three-way fight with Google Pay and another Berkshire Hathaway company called Paytm. And I'm happy to report that, at this point in time, our sponsors are about 50% of the UPI market in India, which is, one of the largest cash transaction platform
what
in the world.
market? What's UPI?
UPI is the framework that, the government of India provide. It is actually the underlying harness on the basis of which pretty much all the, the digitization of financial platform, the whole fintech revolution is based on the UPI platform that was built over a period of 10 years by the government of India. And in that space, PhonePe is now the largest leading. So if you just think of, what we managed to accomplish for that customer and that team was that we freed up all the data engineering so that they could go and focus on innovation, on creating business revenue generating new business use cases as opposed to solving day-to-day operational challenges with whatever it was that they were doing with their data systems.
So, Rohit, I was just wondering if it's possible, maybe in future, to get your customer and you and to talk about some real life use case. So would you be open to that?
Absolutely, why not? We should do it together.
Okay.
I think there are more customer stories to be told. One of our
Yes.
customers, they were going public, and at that point in time, for them, the biggest challenge was to keep the cost to serve an ad as low as possible. And that was the year that they were going IPO. And for them, it was really important that the cost did not catapult. So
Yeah.
it depends upon, what capability and maturity model you are at. Like I mentioned, all our criteria are geared towards the enterprise companies.
I see. That's great. So, so I want. So anyway, we made a promise to our viewers, so now we have to
Absolutely.
do
Yeah.
something about it. But we
We'll
will.
honor that.
Okay, sounds great. So, are there any standards in the space? It seems like data observability is utilizing the same metadata that we are generating for maybe security and privacy, or for data curation or quality. And are there any integration standards, or what do you see happening in this space?
Yeah, so I think what is, at least from the way that we are approaching it, it appears that the kind of stores of data that we'll end up creating will be a superset of all of this, which includes things, such as query metadata, user activity, security logs, different kinds of metrics, which are high velocity and low velocity. So it is possible that, data observability will eventually become the source, or, the repository destination to which all these different kinds of data elements are written down onto. And, that then starts getting used or processed for several other use cases or purposes. Um, it is also possible, and we are in the process of doing it. We are also doing some kind of open APIs for the observability data itself so that people can consume it. But we're also making ourselves open in the sense that somebody could write into these repositories. And finally, we are also integrating, going out and fetching data which already exists in certain repositories. For example, there are several data governance tools which exist, which have enough metadata, they have enough tagging, they have enough business
Yeah.
context. So we're actually going and integrating with all of that.
Very nice.
Um,
Yeah.
and because there's like a mutual fit, it's a very, very good sort of arrangement, because, data governance, the way that some of the previous generation vendors have approached, and even some of the current ones, is very, very, passive way of just organizing data from the practitioners. And since we're bringing the active real-time, near real-time behavior into those catalogs, into those usage and journeys that are getting created, I think it's a very, very good synergistic partnership that
That's
can be
good.
created.
Very nice. So I want to mention that this space is new. We don't have a lot of common understanding of what to do. One question that I get from my customers quite frequently is, uh, how do I evaluate a data observability tool? So I'm happy to announce that I worked on a evaluation criteria, which I will release when we release this video. And in March of 2022, there will be an evaluation criteria. So with that, I want to ask you the last couple of questions before we change tracks again. My question is, for people who are watching this and they want to get into data observability, how can they get started? And corollary to that is, are there use cases where data observability may be an overkill?
Well, I've been repeating this answer, so I'm going to repeat the same answer for this edition of our show as well here. I think you need to look at the surface area. You need to look at where the big rocks are, where the big problems are, and what you actually need to scale your system really. What is giving you operational pain on a day-to-day basis? What is upsetting the business users? Where are the places or areas in which you're completely lacking, missing your SLOs and SLAs? Is your developer productivity low because of certain causes, certain reasons? Are they just rerunning ETL pipelines or redoing transformations because data quality was extremely poor?
Mhm.
Are they repeating things because, the underlying systems did not work? So I think the identification of, what is your surface area for now and for later, I think that is really important. And when, to your earlier point about, making a selection criteria, I think the most important thing is how long will a particular acquisition of technology work for you? Is it comprehensive enough? Is it a point solution? Is it a platform? Is it something that can grow into all the needs that you will face as an organization? Because there are only so many ways in which you will get successful with your data, and the problems of the whole industry are going to be common. So de-risk the company, understand your surface area, look at the future roadmap, and make a selection.
That is great. Thank you so much, Rohit. So before we change tracks, I want to ask you, is there anything else you want to talk about the product? I may not have done justice to before we.
Well, I'm just curious to, to hear your thoughts on the selection criteria that you've just written. What are the key elements? Why don't you actually, given your vast experience at Gartner and, seeing many industries come, set up shop, fold, unfold, how do you look at this space?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. Actually, I don't think I was prepared for this, but uh, you've put me on the spot. So first of all, I think when we talk about observability, the way I start at the 30,000 foot level. This is what I've done most of my working life. So at the 30,000 foot level, I think there are two types of observability spaces. There is IT and operations, and then the second one is business and data. So at the IT and operations, that's where all these companies we talked about, like Splunk, Datadog, Sumo Logic, App Dynamics, Cribble, fall. So they are looking at operations, applications like containers, infrastructure, security, and privacy. Now, I am more focused on the data observability. In data observability, I look at data quality, I look at data compute, data pipeline, AI and ML, and sometimes the business observability, which is KPIs, which is a bit different. So in all of these, the overall flow is you detect an event, raise an alert, do root cause analysis, send the feedback. So you can tell the alerting mechanism that I've handled it or stop alerting me. And then you also remediate it and then send the feedback. So that is a flow. So you detect an event, create an alert, do root cause analysis, remediate the problem, and underlying all this is feedback. So in my evaluation criteria, I've divided the whole criteria into 5 different boxes. The first one is sources and collectors. What are the systems that you are observing? How robust are your collectors or your scanners? Then the second thing is monitor and measure. How good are you at monitoring and measuring the metrics? Then the third is analyze and optimize. You need to analyze the metrics and optimize them. Then the next bucket that I look at is operate and manage, which is basically how do I operate this? How do I manage the tool? There are many times when I see that tools get bought, but then they get put on the shelf because they just are not easy to use. The final 5th bucket I look at is underlying architecture, and that informs me on how well does a product scale, how cost effective it is, how is it deployed. So that's under architecture. Then there's a final piece which is not technical, but it's what is the type of customers, what is the viability of the companies, what is the pricing, support, and all that. So that is my overall overarching way of how I look at it. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. That's great. You've actually gone into a lot more detail than, I covered in my overview. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. So, all right. So let's talk about leadership. So I want to ask you, you are very hands-on, you're a practitioner, you've witnessed these problems. What was your transition to becoming a CEO? And how many startups have you had in the past?
Oh my God. So this is this is a very, very important question, right? Because the last one is the easiest. My first experience working in a startup was with, InMobi, a very early engineer, single digit engineer over there, and had the opportunity to see exponential growth. Like I mentioned, earlier, we raised $200 million in 2011 when I don't think Facebook and Twitter had raised so much money, which was great, an extraordinary phase of my startup life. The first company that I was the CEO of was called Absterix, the company that got acquired by 247.
Mhm.
And, oftentimes people ask me, how long have you been doing this startup? And so I asked them, okay, so what is the reference point? Is it 2008 when I started working a startup, or is it 2018
Yeah.
when I started, Acceldata? So I think, you go through a lot of, sort of learnings,
Yeah.
and those learnings are not limited just to exploration of the capabilities that you have as a technical person, but also your own ability to inspire people, to gather them, to put together a good team and make them work together. So I think fundamentally for me, leadership has been about, getting the right set of people, making sure that they are inspired about a mission, and you have to walk the talk. You just can't keep talking the talk and not walk the talk. So I think, that really resonates with me. I really appreciate people who actually are able to demonstrate leadership in certain activities that they do on a day-to-day basis, and they do it better than everybody else, and they actually set a very high bar and standard for others to emulate, and then, look forward to accomplishing that one day in their own lives as well. So I think, that's the model. I think today when we are speaking, I think Zelensky is the theme. Just look at how he's exhibiting leadership,
Mm.
inspiring a whole nation. I
And
don't think
Ukraine.
there could be a better example.
Yeah, very true. So there's a reason why I asked this, because it's like every day I see there are very successful leaders, and then I also see turmoil in some companies that have been started lately by a lot of engineers. These engineers are coming from all these big companies that we know, but then there's something that's missing in how they are running the company. It's not aligned to, like, it's not necessary that an engineer mentality will translate into a good CEO. So
Oh, it
that's
will not. It certainly will not. I think the other additional capabilities, and just like in any other field of life, just because you're a good author does not make you a great person. Just because you're a good sales leader does not make you a great leader for the rest of the organization as well. I think it requires a little bit of intelligence, which allows you to be multifaceted and think about multiple problems at the same time. It just depends upon, how big your spatial field is, how good you are, in orienting yourself to the demands of different groups and destinations that you're dealing with internally, and your own constituents, your customers, and everybody else. I think it has to deal with a lot of empathy,
I see.
to
Empathy, yeah.
understand. Yeah, I mean, if you're not empathetic in today's world, especially in COVID, where 99% of your team is forever going to be remote, we are today. I'm in my office here in the Bay Area, and there are three of us, and the three of us have gotten together after, I don't know, probably 2.5 years, and
Oh,
we've not
wow.
seen each other. So the kind of leadership that you need to exhibit at this point in time has
Yeah.
to be empathetic, a lot more responsible, and has to sort of have elements of softness.
So I'm curious, like, how much of your company has grown from pre-COVID to COVID?
Yeah.
And in general, like, how are you growing the company, whether it's people, offices, customers, partners, etc.?
So we're, on course for some rapid expansion. When we shut down the company on, I think, 23rd March 2020, when COVID hit,
Yeah.
we were 16 people with just two of us on the edge of the empire, three of us on the edge of the empire in the US, um, out of, I think, 17, 18 people. Right now, we're about 150 people, including, contractors and interns and everybody else. And that's happened in just about, 18 months or 19 months. And we're continuing to expand. And the reason for our expansion is, the kind of demand that we are seeing from customers today. We had not seen this in the past. We've not seen this in 2020, the way that, customers expanded in 2021 and continuing with a rapid surge of activity in 2022, we are expanding in all regions. So at this point in time, our employees live in about 10 countries. I think we have customers in 12 countries right now. Majority of them, of course, being in the US. US is essentially the number one destination from our standpoint. All our GTM activity is led by US, and associated to that, we also have field offices in APAC, which is a significant presence for us. We just recently started an office in the UK as well. So that way, it's all expansion as fast as you can hire. But the job market is so good that people are getting multiple offers all the time. Very difficult to hire the best people who you really want to work with.
So you haven't seen like 75% of your company hires in person?
I haven't seen, so, let me put it this way. I've probably seen about 20% of my company. I've not seen 80% of my company.
Wow. Wow.
Not in person.
In person, yes. So, so just last couple of questions, and then we'll wrap it up. What advice will you give to fellow data analytics or IT professionals on how the market is going and what job opportunities and how to engage? Maybe some of them want to start their own companies.
Yeah, I mean, all of that actually boils down to just focus. How narrowly can you focus yourself, and how passionate do you feel about sticking to that problem statement for a long time? We had this discussion at my household when I was starting this company, and I told my wife that, look, this is going to be a 10-year block of time gone. So unless both of us are comfortable, realizing this, we won't be able to do that. Because if you're trying to solve a serious problem,
right,
if you're trying to solve a problem that materially changes the outcome of data teams and produces inordinate amount of ROI for all the companies that are going to deploy DNA solutions, MLAI, you will have to keep building layers and layers and layers, and your second, third, fourth, fifth acts need to be as good as your first act. So this is going to be an industry which is going to be shifting very rapidly. The fundamentals don't change though. You still have to be reliable, you still have to be efficient, your product needs to stand the test of time, it has to be high quality. Right. But all of that starts with, who is your eventual master? I keep telling, everybody in the company as well that, the only master that we serve is our ideal customer profile or persona. We don't serve anybody else. Nobody in my company serves the CEO. Nobody serves anybody else. Everybody just serves the customer. And unless you have that focus on iterating with the customer on nailing down that one proposition that works for or makes the life of a customer delightful, I don't think it's possible to succeed. And that goes, by the way, for all DNA profiles and personas as well.
That is great. Are there any books, organizations to join that you recommend?
Well, I wouldn't be able to recommend too many organizations because, I've just not had the time to keep up, but, there are excellent meetup groups, particularly from Snowflake, Databricks, Confluent, Hadoop standpoint, which I think, all young professionals should definitely be part of. In terms of my own, interests in books, my interests are very varied. I can read any kind of thing, but two books that I highly recommend. One is certainly the Gospel of Ramakrishna, that helps me, keep my life centered. And the second book, which I recently read, was Amazon Unbound. It was an amazing book. It has captured the high velocity journey of Amazon in such a nice and captivating way. And my previous, favorite book used to be Shoe Dog, written by,
Phil Knight.
Yeah, Phil Knight.
Phil Knight, right?
Yeah, Phil Knight.
The Nike. I see.
It's an amazing book.
Yeah. And which is the first one you mentioned? I didn't get the name.
The Gospel of Ramakrishna. It's a spiritual book, for people who are interested in just trying to find what the meta values of life are.
I see. Very, very cool. So this line of question is giving us some insight into what's behind Rohit. So I'll ask the very last question and then we will end. Tell us something about yourself that the world doesn't know.
I drive really fast. I'm a really, really fast driver and I love cars. Whenever I get an opportunity, I drive cars really, really fast.
You have to be the fastest driver on the road?
Oh, no, those ambitions are long gone.
I see. I see. That is great. Well, thank you so much, Rohit. It was such a pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation. I hope viewers find this type of conversation valuable. As promised, we are going to come back to you with some more content on data observability. But for now, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It was a pleasure that you stayed with us till the very end. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Thanks for having me today.
You're welcome.